Welcome back to the Nurse Leader Debrief. I'm Amy Trueblood, and I am the host of this podcast. When I started the journey to creating this podcast, my main hope was to meet and inspire nurse leaders serving in a variety of roles across the country. And today I'm thrilled to bring you Annie Clayton Orrison, who I met through this podcast. She volunteered to be on, and I'm just so glad that she did, and I know you will be too. Annie and I talk in this first part of her interview about taking chances on yourself, amazing opportunities that there are in nursing leadership, and just how fulfilling it is to lead a group of nurse leaders and nurses to achieve excellence in patient care. Annie talks about how it is to be a nurse representative on various hospital and system-wide projects. And we talk a lot about nurse leaders as second victims and how heartbreaking it is to hear and need to be a part of making change when you hear that people have been harmed in your organization, whether that's a patient or a staff. I encourage you to listen all the way through part one and to join us for part two, as we had some distinctive time where it was a good place to create two episodes. So welcome, Annie. It is time for your debrief.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Sorry to interrupt you. Amy, welcome to the Nurse Leader Debrief. I'm so glad to finally meet you. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are as a leader, as a person, and share a little bit about your career journey.
Sure, I would love to do that. Thank you for having me. My name is Annie Clayton Orrison. I'm a very proud mom, wife, and most of all, probably a nurse. I am blessed with three beautiful kiddos, ranging in age from 4 to 15. So life outside of work is quite interesting. And then at work, I really have the privilege and honor of being a leader over 6 medical surgical units at a trauma center. And I oversee just about all the operations, from patient experience to really getting to work with the leaders of those units, and getting to have a hand in just about everything. My current organization is also undergoing a high reliability organization journey. I happen to be the nursing rep for that on many different avenues. I'm absolutely loving it. And then we are also switching to a new form of EMAR. So we are getting Epic, which a lot of people love. So I represent a lot of the operations side of nursing in that aspect as well. I particularly enjoy the operations and business side. That was a surprise to me because I really loved the bedside. I started out as a neuro PCU nurse, loved that population. But if anyone can remember, this was a time when nursing, you took whatever job you got offered. There weren't many positions open in my area, and it was night shift. I am not a night person. I'm like a bird. I go down with the sun and get up really early. So that was really challenging for me. Have a lot of respect for the night shift folks, though. And I took a position on a med-surg oncology unit because it was day shift. And that's truly the only reason. And I made that leap to one of our different sister facilities and fell in love. I fell in love with the oncology population. I actually fell in love with med-surg, which is definitely a calling. You either typically love or hate it. I happen to love it. And from there, I really started my leadership career. Quickly was asked to become a charge nurse. And within that same unit, I became the assistant nurse manager and nurse manager. Really loved my time there. Had a lot of great learning experiences, challenging experiences, and decided that I was ready to grow. So I came back to the tertiary facility within our organization and managed a cardiovascular unit, which was totally out of my comfort range. Learned a lot of respect for those nurses too. And then a director over the med-surg units came open. And as I mentioned, that's kind of where my passion is for many reasons. It has so many new nurses that need that support. It's just a difficult field. So I applied for that, and I'm really privileged that I've been in it now for 2 years, and I absolutely love what I do.
Oh, congratulations. It is such a fulfilling and rewarding career path. And it sounds like you and I have had similar paths. And I have a love for adult med-surg care as well, and within the hospital setting in specific. That's just an area that is a specialty in and of itself, as you mentioned, and is a calling. And there are just so many wonderful people serving in that capacity, whether they're taking care of patients directly or in leadership. So I'm thrilled to hear more about your journey. I'd like to talk about a few things first before we switch gears on that. You said you were pegged early on for leadership roles. What have you learned, or what do you think that was about?
So it's pretty funny. It was a little intimidating because it was 2 weeks into being on a new unit, and the manager approached me and said, "Hey, would you consider relief charge?" And I really think at that time, I have a background in anthropology.
Oh,
I was that before I ever became a nurse. I was an anthropologist and actually a cultural medical anthropologist. So I love people. I love talking. I love figuring out what makes you tick. And I usually can find something with someone that I connect with. And so the dialogue can just be easy and comfortable. I think she saw that in me being able to relate to people pretty well. And then I also don't get rattled very easily. I'm pretty composed, even in challenging environments, but I'm also great at time management. And as a charge nurse, you have to have that. And, I think she identified that in me very early, and I'm really grateful she saw that.
oh, amazing. Did you have any moments of, gosh, am I prepared for this, or am I ready for this?
Absolutely. Especially because, on the med surg world, most of the time we have the highest ratios, and most of the time the charge nurse would have a team. And this was at a time when we were really focusing on the patient experience. So the charge nurse had to do rounds, observations, give feedback, and have patients. And in the beginning, I was like, I just don't know that this is for me. I would have knots in my stomach when I would be going to work. And then I really got to where I enjoyed it. When you get to mentor your peers, and see them succeed, that's what I started getting to see. Like, I can help you. That was really fulfilling.
Oh, amazing. It really, really is. That's what it's all about, right? Is taking these positions and roles and challenges, even when we feel a little bit ill-prepared or uncomfortable, and finding where the joy is and harnessing in on our strengths. So those mentoring and time management, as you mentioned, in those charge nurse and supervisor types of roles, is just really, really critical. So what made you then want to pursue the manager role? I'll tell you why I'm asking, because a lot of our listeners are currently working in manager roles. And oftentimes when I'm speaking or teaching classes of managers across the country, I hear even the managers themselves, a good proportion of them would not recommend the role of a manager. When you were considering it, did you have any doubts, or what did you hear from colleagues? I remember, let me just back up.
Absolutely.
When I was,
Yeah.
I switched from nurse practitioner program into an administrative nursing program. And I had a colleague at the time from the nurse practitioner program that said, "Oh, you're going to become one of them." And so, so that was what I was introduced to it from, like, no longer get to be a part of the, at least that was their perception. I no longer get to be a part of the team.
Role. You're now an us versus them mentality. It's funny because I think every role has kind of pursued me. I'm not so sure it was the other way around, for the very reason that there isn't a lot of, positive discussions around the roles because they're challenging. I remember it was a fellow assistant nurse manager for another unit approached me and said, "I think you would be really good for the assistant manager role on your unit." And I admittedly thought she was crazy. I said, "Oh no, I see how much you're called. I feel comfortable in my charge nurse role now. I feel really good coming to work every day." But there was a need. And I think, as a nurse, when you hear that there's a need, for me anyways, it was, okay, I'll try it in an interim role. That's what I said. I'll try it on for size. I'm willing to try it out. And then found that you could affect even more people in that role than I thought. I think there's this perception, you move away from the bedside, you're not going to impact the patient care, but you really can do even more. So I got proficient in the assistant nurse manager role, and my manager left. So then it was, "Annie, will you move up?" And it was kind of the same thing again. "Oh, I don't know. I've just got comfortable. I'm not so sure." That's really shouldering everything for the unit. Like, when you're the manager, you own everything. And I said the same thing. I said, "I'll do it for interim. Let me try it out. Let me make sure, honestly, that it fits with my home life." I think that's a deterrent for a lot of people, because especially if you're in the clinical setting, it's a 24-hour role. It's written into our job descriptions where I currently work. You have 24-hour responsibility. That's a big thing to assume, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. I think when I finally accepted the role, I was actually pregnant, which was a concern for me too. But I really saw an opportunity for my team that I had worked with to have a different leadership style as a manager. And if I didn't step in and do it, who would? So I took the leap. It was a big leap at the time, and I'm just so grateful I did it because that team, we just reached so many awesome achievements together. We went over 500 days without a pressure injury after being the unit that had the most. We reduced our fall rate by 75%. It just was an awesome experience. It was intimidating.
So how did you find the balance of this 24/7 responsibility with 20 with availability? Like, I think that's something that people struggle with. We ourselves or our teams assume that that means you can always be reached. How did you find balance there?
Initially, that was the biggest piece for me that I had a hard time adjusting to. And what I realized was I really needed to grow my charge nurses and my relief charge nurses. I kind of come from the perspective in leadership like I do in parenting. I don't want to do for my child what they can do themselves because it helps them build confidence, right? They feel good about themselves if they can do it. Same thing for my leaders. They're an extension of me. Charge nurse is frontline leader. So really harnessed their talents, their strengths. Yeah, it's an awesome feeling. But having them be my hands and feet allowed me to have time, when I'm with my family or at home, because I had full confidence that they could manage it. Also, just setting boundaries. Sometimes people want to reach out to you for everything, and you don't have to be rude to set boundaries. I would just say, I'm with my family right now. Can I connect with you tomorrow? And that reduced over time. People came to respect.
I think they do. I think that's a conversation we don't have enough, or we aren't allowing enough time for people to actually figure out like a realistic boundary. And how do you do that? And how do you follow up? Because there's just no way. The pressures that are on these managers from above and from below and everywhere in between are just daunting. And I even know as an executive leader, I would find myself texting people and I'd say, oh, sorry to be texting, and I need to learn that, no, I need to respect that as well. And I'm not modeling setting very good boundaries, so it sounds like that was probably really helpful for those that you were mentoring and those who have become managers as well. You kind of can see that continue culturally. It's a different culture, and one that I just encourage anybody listening to really reach out to somebody for help if you are unable to figure out how to do that. And sure, you have the support of your organization, but leaning into and pouring into those that are in these assistant manager, charge nurse, supervisor roles, I think is just really, really critical to our success, as well as to succession planning, as you mentioned, right? This is a whole group of people that presumably are interested in leadership, and we can opportunistically and also just faithfully pour into them. So I think that's so cool. I wish we had hours and hours to talk, because it sounds like
I know. Well, and I'm over 7 leaders technically. And what I always tell them is, ride the wave. That's what I tell them. There's going to be days where you have to be there longer. Something might happen. But there's going to be days where it's perfect and you have a super strong charge nurse on. And if you can steal that time back, you need to do it, because you're going to be at home and have to get calls. So just supporting them to have that work-life balance and really investing in their human side, not the work side, I think just helps.
Oh, absolutely. The human connection. But sometimes I think managers find it hard to step out and maybe be different, challenge that status quo from within their roles, and really help to guide their colleagues, right, into recognizing that it's okay. I think there's some feeling of, oh man, this person stays until 8 p.m. I need to stay until 8 p.m. Or, the staff in this unit love that this manager does everything for them, right, as you were talking about, and I'm not that. And so how is that even possible? Is there even room for that? And I think we're here to tell the listeners there is, and there's so much joy in it when you get to, you're not only pouring into people, but some of that task list goes away as you are using some of those opportunities to build up the team around you. So that's fascinating. So congratulations.
Exactly.
You've done,
Thanks. I love what you said.
you've done a lot of,
Yeah, we need to be more supportive of that. I really feel like there's no, I kind of look at leaders, if you have to be here 24/7, something's wrong. You haven't built your team up to be the most efficient they can be. And I know we're nurses and our tendency is to want to be the caregiver and do everything around the clock, but that's robbing people of their own.
I used to always say that I would know that um, I was doing a great job when I no longer had one in the manager role, meaning that everything had been perfectly supported. Of course, we never reached perfection, but supported in a way that was allowing people to be self-sufficient and to grow where they were, to take care of things, to know resources, right? This is one thing that I always think we forget about. Typically, there's a 24/7 leader, a house supervisor that is there on site, and if our assistant leaders who are there or our charge nurses are plugged in, building relationship with that group of people is huge to our successes, and allowing them to make decisions. And if they're decisions we don't agree with, as long as no major harm's done, right, we talk about them. Well, even if we talk about them and we say, next time I would prefer it this way, or this is a time I would have preferred a call, those types of conversations that I think were just challenging to have. So what do you see in your managers now that you're in a director role and you are leading managers, which is a whole different world, right? And to your earlier point, allows even more impact and influence over even more people, which is tremendous, not from a power perspective, but from a perspective of ensuring that your style, culture, and achievement of excellence is going to even larger scale. What do you find that our managers these days struggle with the most?
I think coming out of COVID, one of the hardest things for them to get comfortable with again was accountability, because there was a fear of, if I, hold someone to standards of expectations or to our policies and procedures, they might leave, because that was a reality. So, when I first came into this role, there was a lot of opportunity around quality and safety metrics. And that's my biggest thing. We're here to keep our patients safe. We're here to do a good job. So kind of delving into it, I'm a huge proponent of extreme accountability, but also supportive accountability. The teams really hadn't been held to a standard, and getting them comfortable having those conversations that for so long it was survival. Those conversations weren't happening. And I had to explain that accountability isn't punitive. Accountability is actually really rewarding your high performers because they want to be recognized for their awesome work, and helping those who just need a little more help. They may have an educational deficiency, may have a training deficiency. It's not to be punitive. And that kind of goes hand in hand with trust too. I think a lot of leaders coming out of the pandemic lost a lot of trust in leadership just because of the nature of the constant daily changes, the recommendations. It was a tough time to be a leader and put on that face. So had to spend a lot of time building those personal relationships. And quite honestly, for a long time, we would often not talk about work at all. It would be about what's going on at home and how can I help you? Because ultimately, if you aren't doing well there, you can't do well at work. I would say in current state, we're really still working on how we harness the team to achieve those results and not have the manager be the one driving that. That's kind of a hard flip to make, where you're doing all the work, but now you got to get the people to buy in and do the work. And that, getting people to follow and lead you is a totally different, beast in and of itself. But I can tell you now, 2 years in, I just am so proud. One unit went from a 4.12 fall rate to 1.12, and they are the least amount of falls. And that came from someone on my team who probably trusted the least, was the most afraid of accountability, but she now has her team so highly invested in her goals for our patients. It's the right perspective that she's
Yeah.
enjoying work again.
That's one of the
It's been
reasons that I was interested in hosting this platform is that it's been a long time since I have been in a manager role. It's
Mhm.
been 14 years, I guess, since I've been in a manager role. And some things are the same, right? We have always struggled with managers getting appropriate training, for example, or competency development to take on those roles. That's been the case
Correct.
for a long time. There have always been challenges with staffing, and all of it was just amplified, right? We've struggled to get good, solid professional governance cultures, not just team structures, but cultures to where this accountability and this professional ownership is there, right? We've struggled with all of that for many years. What, from my perspective, is different is that now we have all been through a traumatizing experience together, all with different
Very.
vantage points,
Yep.
and that's true of our patients, it's true of our staff, and so things have changed in terms of even just that relational dynamic between patients and nurses, between nurses and their leaders, between first line leaders and the executive leaders. I mean, everything has changed, and so it's not, some of these things that we used to do in the past are no longer really relevant, or they don't work, right? So that's just a complicating factor. When people say, "Oh, this all started with COVID," like the shortage, that's not what started with COVID. Um, However, it is how we address it needs to be different because of
Mhm.
the kind of space of trauma people sit in, and it was the first time in my career anyway that there's this shared experience happening for everybody in the world, and each of us had to kind of try to learn as we go, to your point. And I think we lost a little bit of what does that support to the staff and specifically the managers look like, as they're the ones that are getting called in to actually work shifts and then needing to still do all their leadership responsibilities and everything. It's just a whole different world. So I
Correct.
appreciate hearing from
And
folks
I think,
currently in these,
yeah.
you know,
And I mean, it's been a journey, but that's where I think, I'm a huge proponent of giving grace, having grace for others. I think that's part of what I built in the team with trust is I'm not expecting perfection, expecting effort, and anything else we can talk about and we can learn from, kind of like you mentioned. And we'll go from there. But everybody who's been through this deserves some grace. We all carry different burdens from having gone through it, and we just need to recognize the humanity of
absolutely.
each other. We're not
Absolutely. And
perfect.
what I love about what you're saying is that's not without an expectation of some outcome or growth or action, right? We cannot sit and say, oh,
Correct.
this is what we've been through and I just can't do X. The question needs to be, how do we come together and help support each other
Mhm.
with grace, to achieve what our patients and our staff and we as leaders deserve in our psychologically and physically safe work environments that are
Correct.
built to achieve excellence, which gets me to you mentioned a high reliability journey. Can you, in your own words, for listeners that might
Mhm.
not be familiar with that, just give a brief snippet of what that means to you and your organization and what your role as the nursing representative looks like?
Sure. So I'm incredibly excited for this. High reliability journey is just truly saying that safety is our number one goal. Zero harm truly is our number one goal. And everyone in this organization owns all of it. So, whether you are someone who works in nutritional services or a bedside nurse or an executive, we all have onus to make sure that this is what we're targeting every single day. And this is our focus. For me specifically, I have always been involved in quality and safety, whether it's falls or pressure injuries. And so I got the privilege of being chosen to rep nursing from that perspective because quality and risk actually drives a lot of this. But I'll tell you, when you sit in a room for 3 hours and hear every single fall that has caused harm, every single pressure injury that's caused harm, and what that's done, it was really gut wrenching. But at the same time, the fact that we're on this journey to fix those issues is really exciting. And there's a pathway moving forward that we really haven't had before. And I think that we lost sight of that a little bit for a long time, but I'm so excited to be part of this journey because we can do it. I know we can do it. We've done it before. So I'm really honored to be
That is really exciting. I have seen tremendous outcome and from organizations who have pursued that with such diligence, and so I'm excited to hear that you get to play a role and ensure that the nursing leadership voice is at those tables as we move forward. 'Cause part of it is if anybody wants to find some really good practices for yourself, high reliability is about safety, yes, through consistency, right? And through constant asking of why and challenging what is happening. And one of the principles that is my favorite, and I might get it wrong, and I'll make sure I should probably cite it, but from the original book that when we talk about 5 principles of high reliability, I think there's still only 5, is this
Yep.
uh, fail or unwillingness to accept like a simple answer. I'm not saying that correctly, but in other words, a need to look deeper, right? And yeah, oftentimes people would, oh, the patient fell. Well, we're short staffed, right? Or our patient experience was down this month. It's because we had a lot of travelers, and then we just don't look further, right? And we go, oh, okay, yep.
Exactly. And that's where we were. That's honestly where we were. They work through the, why, because, and did you deviate, from best practices? And there were some times where, I had to say this was a failure, on leadership, that we knew about this and we didn't do anything. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But at the same time, it's awesome that we're recognizing that and getting to dive in and say, hey, this is something we have to change, for our associates and our patients. One example of that is a patient who got a fracture. We floated an ICU nurse to a med-surg floor. And you might think CNA to CNA, it really doesn't make a big deal. Well, when you think they've never had 18 patients at one time before, they're not used to ambulating patients. And I sat in that room and heard that staffing plan and I didn't speak up. I didn't think of it. So when we reviewed that, I'm like, that's on me. I didn't think that deeply into the situation. And ultimately, not ensuring that she had the training she needed.
Sure. I think that's a really important thing you hit on too that doesn't get much attention. It's actually the focus of my doctoral work is the emotional and psychological kind of distress on leaders that comes from events of any type, whether we're talking about violence or an adverse event, anything such as that leaders carry a burden around. For whether you want to call it guilt. I'm investigating this, so I don't know how to say it. It's never been studied before. But something that fascinates me is we get very concerned, and it's critically important that our staff, if in the case of an adverse event, for example, or an error, our staff feel and are treated with respect in a non-punitive manner from a just culture perspective, and things are looked at to see what the follow-up needs to be. There just hasn't been a look at managers, and you've already described a couple of times. It's heart-wrenching to hear these things. You do feel responsible. This is this level of ownership, and that's what I'm hopeful that we can even accomplish too through organizations and getting this discussion surfaced. Is our leaders need cared for as well in order to provide that non-punitive, fair, just response.
And I'll tell you, I've been really fortunate to have some amazing leadership, especially on this director level. One in particular stands out. She was in the military for over 30 years, one of the most inspiring women I have ever met. And whenever we have an adverse event, honestly, her first question is, how is the associate? We talk about the second victim. And that was something that was honestly pretty new to me. The old culture that we have moved away from, it did feel punitive, and you carried that burden of the harm. But you're right, even me as a leader, the violence from patients has really increased. We know those statistics have. And I have had up to 6 associates actually be assaulted on one of my units. And it's something the manager and I both carry heavily. I've had to invest in training them in de-escalation and do my best. But the fact that my associate was harmed, it's something that is really heavy to carry. And certainly them coming back to work, making them feel comfortable and supported. My managers struggle with that, I will say. Managing in this new world of mental health crisis that we're experiencing, it's really difficult. But you're right. Second victim is a huge thing that we don't often
and we don't focus on leaders as second victims, and that's really the I think that is important for people to hear. That work is coming. There are others that are focused on the nurse manager and nurse leaders that are in these roles and trying to understand how do we intervene and support for their own well-being so that they can support their teams and figure out that balance, because we need to be focused on every member of the team that's been impacted. And there is a lot of secondary trauma and different aspects that occur even from watching, let alone when you feel responsible in any way, whether you're a direct care provider who made an error of sorts or you're a leader and your team has experienced some sort of emotionally traumatizing event. You feel responsible because, to your earlier point, job description says you are. And how do we
exactly
ensure that we're providing that support? So it's fascinating.
And I'll tell you one thing I feel like our organization has done really well is we actually created a team that comes in for things like that. And it's round the clock. And there's associates trained in compassionate kind of healing. So if you experience a trauma and you need them, you can call them right up and they'll come over. So we're moving in the right direction. I'm hopeful that, other organizations.
Absolutely. I have a privilege. I'm studying at the University of Missouri, where Dr. Susan Scott is on my doctoral committee. And she was the first person to study nurses as second victims and created at MU Healthcare the first, what they call the 4U team. And it sounds very similar. And they have, and so I love to hear that organizations are going down that route. And to our listeners, if you're not, look that up, get in touch with Annie or Dr. Sue Scott and learn more, because that is the biggest intervention from a staff nurse perspective that has been found to be helpful, is to have immediate peer support and ultimately support of your leader. So I'm glad that we covered that today.
Thanks, Annie, for spending time with me here today on the Nurse Leader Debrief. And this is exactly what I wanted this show to be about. Today, we heard raw, authentic, passionate leadership, advice, experience from our guest, Annie Clayton Orrison, and I am so thrilled. Please join us for part 2 of this episode, where we change gears just a little bit and talk about Annie's love for financial operations, as well as her goals in professional practice, including her success as recently being certified and her encouragement for others to do so. That's in part 2. You'll find it anywhere you find your podcasts, and you know that we are here anytime you need a debrief. Have a great day.